Bema podcast. I don't know exactly what Bema stands for, but it's specifically from this guy who was really disillusioned with the American church and like was really struggling with his faith.
That would be me.
Yeah, and then ended up getting more into like the Hebrew side of things and basically got his master's in the Hebrew language and Hebrew studies and spent like 5 years in Israel and learned about all of what's called the Midrash, which was the original Jewish teachings about the Old Testament. And finally, all of these things started to make sense and click for him, and it wasn't all of the head knowledge, it was the heart knowledge too, and just seeing the difference between how the Eastern mindset learns the Bible and experiences God and comes to know the Father, and then as opposed to how we try to interpret the Bible and look at it through a certain lens and wait for things to make sense that don't make sense because it was written in a culture that's completely different than our own.
Right.
And when you don't understand the context of the culture, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
But so specifically for me, one of his really impactful teachings was the story of Abraham and Isaac, because Eastern culture is very focused on how did something happen, like how scientifically, how physically, what was the steps in the story that led to a certain thing happening. So, okay, Abraham left, him and Sarah messed up, they had a different kid, that kid was gone, now God was going to make him sacrifice his true son of promise. So they went up to the thing, but he said that there was going to be a sacrifice prepared for them, and then they get to the top, and he doesn't die because thankfully an angel came just at the right moment. It was a good thing that guy showed up,
Yeah.
And then it was fine. And it's like we see, okay, so maybe that's foreshadowing of Christ, maybe that's because we focus a lot on the how it happened. And we look then to later in the Bible for other things that happened in the similar way. But what God was actually illuminating in that moment is that more than anything, God is a God of your experience. Is that God needed Abraham to understand that he was different than all of the other gods that he had been taught about. Because remember, he came out of Babylon, he left his father's home, because of some voice in the sky. He didn't have the Old Testament or the New Testament or anything to tell him who God was. And so it was really, really common in the cultures around Abraham for their gods to require a child sacrifice, to require the sacrifice of your firstborn. And even after all of this trying, where this voice that he had heard for the first time told him he would have a son, and him and Sarah, right, they took it into their own hands and they messed it up. He needed to learn to trust God. And God said that he would have a son and that he would be fruitful and multiply, but then again this voice comes and says, well, but I need you to sacrifice that one, right? And he's like, well, that's not news to him. He grew up in a culture where that was common. So that, there was no fight. There was no arguing. He's like, oh, it's time. It's like, oh, it's one of these gods. Oh, it's this guy. Of course, this is what we do. There was no argument. It was no fight. It wasn't a surprise. Because that's what Abraham was absolutely used to. That was not out of the ordinary for him at all. Right. There was no reason to fight for it. It was out of the ordinary for Sarah at 98 or whatever to have a kid. So they argued about that a lot.
Yeah.
But this wasn't surprising at all.
Yeah.
This was very normal. But when he gets to the top, and in his heart, he's hoping that that's not true. He's hoping, Isaac, God will provide the sacrifice. He's hoping, he's waiting, but he says, nonetheless, I'm going to listen to this God. Last time Sarah and I didn't trust him. This didn't work out for us. So we're going to go up and do it. And if I sacrifice my son, then I know he's just like these other gods, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what happens. They get to the top, and God didn't tell Abraham, look, I'm different. I'm special. I'm more powerful. I'm more compassionate. I'm more caring than your other gods. It wasn't about reading a book. It wasn't about the head knowledge. It was getting to the top of the mountain and looking at his son and God saying, no, I will never require this sacrifice of you. I am not the kind of God that requires your children. I'm not the kind of God that requires you to sacrifice people. I'm not that kind of God. And it's very different for God to just say, this is who I am. I care about the human race. I am just. I'm merciful. I'm da-da-da-da-da. But what really got Abraham to trust the Lord is his experience of him.
Right.
And in the Hebrew culture, when they talk about the wilderness, their mindset of going into the wilderness is that I'm about to experience God in a new way, and I'm going to have a lesson that sticks with me for the rest of their life.
Yes.
Here, when we walk into the wilderness, we're like, when do we get out of this?
Exactly.
How long is this going to take? I just want to be done. Why is God punishing me? What is it? Because all we're asking when we look at the Bible is, what is God saying about me? But that's not the story of the Bible. The story of the Bible is, what is God saying about God?
Yes.
So the Abraham and Isaac thing had nothing to do with this weird punishment, like, oh, well, you didn't listen to me this time, so I'm going to give you a good spook, and then it'll be okay.
Right.
No, God wasn't teaching Abraham anything about Abraham. God was teaching Abraham everything about God.
Good.
And so for the first time, it didn't seem like this weird tension between, like, why is God being torturous? Because it's really easy for our mindsets to interpret that as God putting Abraham through
Right.
hell
Why would
because
God
of
ask that?
disobedience
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
first place, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't the point at all. He needed Abraham to understand that he was not the kind of God that would require a child sacrifice, because that was really common for Abraham. And because God is very experiential, he had to show him that, not just tell him. And so it makes me think of how often in my life where I've looked past, where God was showing me who he was through experience, rather than me just having head knowledge about it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why we have to be so patient with our understanding of God. Because he's experiential, you can't experience all of him at once. We're temporal beings, right?
Right.
So if you're going to come to know the Father, it's going to take you time and it's going to take you experiences. And you can read about it all you want, and that's good, but what God really cares about is you holding that seed in your heart, and that only comes through experience. So when we have those false concepts of God, like that God is just like other gods, he requires sacrifice, he requires da-da-da, he da-da-da-da-da. What's most important to God is taking you through an experience that proves who he is to you,
Yeah.
so that you never have to question that again.
Yeah.
But
It's good.
Bema
It's good.
podcast, I highly recommend
How do you
it.
spell that?
B-A-Y?
Bema.
Oh, Bema, okay.
Bema.
Bema.
Oh, Bema, okay.
Beam me up.
Is it a YouTube
I listen to it on Google Podcast.
podcast? Bema. Very good.
Yeah, so just for me, the first time that it wasn't God being angry at Abraham. It wasn't
Yeah.
punishment to Abraham.
So what did it speak? So what did it speak to you personally?
Well, I think just that of to like be aware of the experiences
That we're
that I'm
going through.
having.
Right.
Like, because it's good to read the word and have the word in you, but knowing that God's primary form that he would like you to know him is through experience,
Yeah.
it makes you think about your everyday and your struggles and
What we
all
go
those
through.
sort of
He's
things.
trying to tell us
And
who
even those
he
wilderness
is.
things, like I'm not supposed to sit around and wait for it to be over. I'm supposed to be expecting that God is revealing things about himself to me during that time.
That's great.
Hey,
That's
don't
Yeah,
take the
you're
word.
right.
Don't take the word in the wrong context. Long suffering.
yeah, right.
You
Yes.
learn so much through it.
You do.
It sucks. You don't want to go through it, but in the end, what happens? You know him.
Yeah.
You know him,
You know.
not about him. You know him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amen.
Was this
And
about
through
it?
it, it's like the wilderness, like you were saying, Jonathan Kahn was talking about, we, like you said, we want to run from the wilderness, yet God wants to bring us into the wilderness for an outcome.
Yeah.
So a purpose is involved.
Yes.
So it's for us to say, okay, God, I recognize I'm going through stuff, and I know you're in it. So reveal what I need to know
Yeah.
to learn through it.
And not about me, about you.
Yeah.
I think that that's really the biggest mindset, is that the Bible is not God teaching me about me. It's not.
You will learn some
It's
things
so,
about
yeah,
you.
but it's so
You
easy
will.
to look at,
Yes,
like,
you
to look at especially the epistles and be
You
like,
learn so
okay,
much
Paul's
about
saying
them.
this to them. Is he saying that to me? Like, what is,
Right.
because it's not, we're just so used to trying to apply it to us, rather than, because Paul is saying this, what does it teach me about the heart of God,
Right.
right?
But don't you think that we do that because we're still in such a man-centered gospel? Aren't we just such a me mentality?
Yeah.
Because we truly don't understand God yet.
Well, but we also haven't been taught to view the Torah that way. We
Right.
haven't been taught, like people say, the Bible is God's autobiography and stuff, but we haven't been taught to really look at it and say continuously, what is God saying about God? What is God saying about himself? What is God proving about his character?
Right.
It's so easy for us because we haven't had that kind of schooling. We didn't come from an Eastern mindset. We didn't come from rabbinical teaching.
Right.
That's the way that we were taught to interpret the Bible, is God doesn't want us to do this. The Philippians acted this way, you should act this way. The Colossians acted this way, don't act that way. Like,
Right.
it had so much to do with what is God trying to tell me about how to live a good life,
Right.
about how to live my life, rather than what is God showing through all of these cultures, all of these different churches, all of these different people about who he is and what he desires and
Yeah.
his character.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And in the Bible, what we talked on you came over Tuesday, and I told you what was on my heart
Uh-huh.
in the book of Proverbs? That a man sins, and then he rages against God for the causes
Right,
of it. And
Yeah.
saying, it's God who did this to me. You know, damn.
that's right.
You know.
Yeah.
And just so raging against God for the stupidity that I've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so John and I have been in Philippians, and we were in the end of chapter 2 where Epaphroditus is being sent back, and Paul's saying, Timothy, you're talking about Timothy.
Yeah.
I'm
aren't
in
you?
Timothy.
Yeah, and he says, I'm going to send Timothy to you because there's no one like him who will be as genuinely concerned for your well-being. Well, first of all, reading some different interpretations, we realized that Timothy had actually come from that church, which is one of the reasons he would actually genuinely care about them.
Exactly.
But so looking at that and not
His
thinking,
mom was there.
like, okay, God is telling me that I need to be genuinely concerned for everybody else. But saying, no, like, that's good, that's true. But even beyond that, why would God prompt Paul to send Timothy specifically? Because God cares about genuine concern. Because God is a God who genuinely is concerned.
Concerns, exactly.
Like, that's what that's saying.
Right.
It's okay to look at what it's trying to say about me, but more importantly, what I need to be looking out for is what is God saying about himself.
Right.
God is genuinely concerned about his people.
Right.
Love.
Right. And he sends us what we need.
And that's the kind of God that he is.
That's the kind of God that he is, yeah.
And he'll send it in different
That's good.
forms.
Right.
Freaks, geeks, you name it.
That's really good, Andrea.
But it's so easy to look at all of that and just think, what is God saying about me? What do I need to do? What da da da. And instead, like, abstracting it a little bit and saying, no, what does this actually say about the character of God?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good.
Amen. Very
Good.
good, Andrea.